What would you do if, at the busiest airport in your city, you caught your husband, your partner, your anchor, holding another woman so tightly, so lovingly, and calling her, Madam President? Not in a joke, not in a whisper, but with pride, as if she owned him, as if I, his wife, was nothing but a shadow. I stood frozen, luggage in hand, passengers brushing past me, and in that moment, my world cracked open. What came next wasn't just betrayal. It was a revelation that would change not only my marriage, but the truth about who I really was. It began that morning with excitement. Airports have always carried a strange beauty for me. The mix of hellos and goodbyes, the rush of feet on tiled floors, the loudspeaker announcements that seemed to carry people into new chapters of their lives. I had returned earlier than expected from a business trip abroad, a contract I had been working tirelessly on for months. I hadn't told Daniel I was coming back that day. I wanted to surprise him, the man I believed was the center of my world. I pictured his smile when he saw me walking toward him, the warmth in his eyes as he wrapped me in his arms. I thought it would be a moment we'd remember for years, a reminder of why we had chosen each other in the first place. The crowd at the arrival gate was thick, voices overlapping, children laughing, people holding signs with names scrawled across them. I stood a little apart, scanning faces until my eyes landed on him. Daniel. Even in a sea of strangers, he stood out, tall, elegant in his dark suit, every detail of him so familiar to me that it tugged at my heart. For a moment, all I felt was love. That deep, unwavering affection that had carried us through years of marriage. But then I saw her. She was at his side, her hand resting lightly on his arm as if it belonged there. Her presence was magnetic, drawing eyes without her even trying. Her hair gleamed under the fluorescent lights, her heels clicked with poise, and her smile, it was the smile of someone who knew she commanded attention. What froze me wasn't just her beauty, but the way Daniel looked at her. His eyes softened in a way I hadn't seen in years, as though he was gazing at the only person who mattered. And then came the words, clear and deliberate, rising above the chaos around them, "Welcome back, Madam President." My breath caught. The sound of luggage rolling across tiles faded, the announcements on the intercom blurred, and all I could hear were those three words. Madam President. I searched his face, desperate to find a hint that it was a mistake, a joke, anything but what it seemed. But no, he meant it. His voice was reverent, proud, his hand firm around her waist. He wasn't ashamed. He wasn't hiding. He was exalting her. My grip tightened on the handle of my suitcase until my knuckles whitened. I wanted to move, to march forward, to rip her hand off his arm and demand an explanation. But my body betrayed me. My feet stayed rooted, my throat locked, my entire being paralyzed by disbelief. Passengers flowed around me, brushing my shoulder, bumping my suitcase, yet no one noticed the woman standing in the middle of the terminal with a heart shattering silently inside her chest. When they turned and walked away, their shoulders brushing, his head bent slightly toward hers as if they were sharing a private world, something inside me cracked further. I told myself to leave, to walk away, to save my dignity. But instinct overpowered logic. I followed them. Each step felt heavy, my legs moving against the weight of my collapsing reality. They slipped through the sliding glass doors into the humid air outside, where a sleek black car with tinted windows waited. The driver opened the door, and without hesitation, Daniel guided her inside. First, his hand never leaving her lower back. Then he climbed in after her, and the door shut with a finality that made my stomach turn. I stood there, in the exhaust fumes of their departure, unable to breathe. My chest felt hollow, as if something vital had been ripped from me. The crowd behind me spilled forward, loved ones embracing, taxis honking, but I was alone in a way I had never felt before. Alone with questions, alone with betrayal, alone with the haunting words, Madam President. That night, I sat on the edge of our bed, staring at the empty side that belonged to him. The sheets were neatly tucked, as if untouched, though I knew better. My reflection in the mirror across the room looked unfamiliar, my face pale, eyes hollow. When Daniel finally came home, close to midnight, he smiled as though nothing had happened. He kissed my forehead lightly, asked about my trip, complained about his long day at the office. I nodded, silent, my heart a storm beneath a calm mask. I wanted to scream, to confront him, but my voice remained trapped. Fear clamped my throat, fear of what he might say, fear of hearing the truth spoken aloud, fear that the life I thought was ours had never been real. Over the next days, I tried to convince myself I had imagined it. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. Maybe she was a colleague, a client, someone he was working with. But each time he slipped away for late meetings, each time I caught the faint trace of unfamiliar perfume on his suit jacket, the fragile hope I clung to cracked further. He smiled less at me. He touched me less. He laughed at texts that I never saw. And though he came home every night, his soul, his heart, his devotion, it was elsewhere. One evening, I could no longer ignore the gnawing suspicion. He kissed my cheek, told me he had to attend a dinner with a client, and left. Something inside me refused to stay put. I grabbed my keys and followed him, my heart pounding against my ribs as my car trailed his through the city's dim streets. His headlights cut through the darkness until they stopped outside a hotel I recognized, an elegant, discreet place known for its exclusivity. My stomach turned. I parked a short distance away and watched him step out, straightening his tie before heading inside. Minutes later, I saw her. The woman from the airport. She arrived in another car, stepping out with the same air of authority, her presence undeniable. She entered the hotel, and I didn't need to wonder which suite she was headed to. My hands shook as I left the safety of my car and walked inside. Every step was heavier than the last. The hallway outside their suite felt suffocating, my lungs tight, my chest aching. I pressed my ear against the door, praying I wouldn't hear what I feared. But then his laughter reached me, followed by her voice, smooth and confident, "You know this is dangerous, Daniel. If the truth comes out." And then his reply, firm, unwavering, "The truth will never come out. You are my everything, Madam President. She's just a cover, nothing more." The words shattered me. A cover. That's all I was. Not a wife, not a partner, not the woman he vowed to love for life. Just a convenient disguise to hide his affair. Tears blurred my vision, hot and relentless, as I pressed a trembling hand against the wall for balance. My entire world, every memory, every sacrifice, every dream we had shared, it all crumbled in an instant. I stumbled back from the door, my legs weak, my body trembling as though I had been struck. I barely made it outside before the sobs tore free, violent and raw. The city lights blurred, the hum of cars drowned beneath the sound of my breaking heart. For the first time in years, I felt truly invisible. And yet, in that devastating moment, a small ember of something new sparked inside me. Anger, a refusal to stay silent, a refusal to remain the shadow he thought I was. I didn't know it then, but that night was the beginning of everything. The beginning of uncovering a web of lies bigger than betrayal, bigger than love. The beginning of finding a strength I never knew I had. The beginning of a truth that would shake not just my marriage, but everything I thought I knew about the man I called my husband. That night, after hearing those devastating words through the hotel door, I didn't sleep. My body was exhausted, but my mind refused to rest. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard him again, calling her, my everything, dismissing me as nothing more than a cover. It replayed like a broken record, tearing at me from the inside. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my thoughts spiraling. Was our entire marriage a lie? Had I been living with a stranger all along? Or was I just too blind, too trusting, too willing to see only the version of him that I wanted to believe in? When dawn finally crept through the curtains, it didn't bring relief. Instead, it revealed the emptiness of the bed beside me, the cold sheets where he had slept only for a few short hours before disappearing again. His morning smile, his affectionate kiss on my cheek, his casual words about being late for a meeting, I saw them now for what they were, rehearsed lines in a performance designed to keep me in the dark. But the performance was unraveling, and I was no longer a passive audience. For the first time in years, I did something I had never done. While he showered, I opened his briefcase. My hands trembled as I sifted through neatly stacked papers, files labeled with his company's logo, contracts I had seen before. But beneath them, tucked into a folder I didn't recognize, were documents marked with a seal, official, heavy with significance. They weren't work files. They were government papers. At the top of one page, I saw a name. Hers. The woman he called Madam President. My pulse quickened. My mind tried to reject what my eyes read, but the truth was undeniable. She wasn't just some mistress. She wasn't simply a powerful executive or wealthy benefactor. She was deeply connected to politics, so much so that the title he gave her at the airport wasn't an exaggeration or a pet name. It was real. She was on the cusp of becoming a leader, of holding authority far greater than I had ever imagined. And Daniel, he wasn't just a cheating husband. He was complicit, entangled in something far bigger than an affair. I closed the briefcase just before he stepped out of the bathroom, water dripping from his hair, his tie already in hand. He kissed me casually, his lips brushing my forehead, and I forced myself to stay calm, my heart thundering in my chest. I couldn't let him know what I had discovered. Not yet, because I realized then that this wasn't only about my marriage. This was about deception at a scale I had never fathomed. And if I wasn't careful, exposing him could put me in danger. Over the days that followed, I became a quiet observer in my own home. I studied him, watched his movements, memorized the times he left, the calls he made, the people he met. He grew careless, too confident in my silence. While he thought I was still the obedient wife, the invisible shadow, I was becoming something else entirely. I was gathering evidence, documenting his double life piece by piece. Every text he hid, every late-night phone call, every whispered conversation, it became a thread in the web I was slowly weaving. But with each new discovery came another knife to the heart. I saw the way he looked at her when he thought no one was watching, the devotion in his eyes that used to be reserved for me. I read the words he wrote in his hidden letters to her, words of loyalty, words of sacrifice. And then the phrase that sealed it all, our future depends on my silence. She will never know. She doesn't matter. He meant me. I didn't matter. The realization burned, but instead of breaking me further, it fueled me. One evening, he returned home late, his tie loose, his eyes tired but smug. He poured himself a drink and sat across from me at the dinner table, making small talk about trivial things. I stared at him, the man I had once loved so deeply, and I realized how much of myself I had given away to someone who had never truly valued me. My silence had been his shield. My trust had been his freedom. My love had been his disguise. And I decided it would end. The moment of confrontation came sooner than I expected. It was a Saturday morning, sunlight streaming through the windows, the scent of coffee filling the kitchen. He looked relaxed, scrolling through his phone with a faint smile, no doubt reading a message from her. I watched him for a long moment, then finally spoke, my voice calm, steady, almost too steady. Daniel, I know. His head snapped up, his smile faltering, his eyes narrowing with confusion. Know what? He asked, his voice carefully neutral, as though buying himself time. I didn't flinch. About her. About Madam President. About everything. The silence that followed was suffocating. His hand tightened around his coffee cup, his knuckles whitening. For the first time, I saw fear flicker in his eyes, not the fear of losing me, but the fear of being exposed. He opened his mouth, perhaps to lie, perhaps to beg, but I didn't give him the chance. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder of evidence I had collected, copies of documents, printed messages, photographs. I slid it across the table to him, my hands steady even as my heart raced. He stared at the folder, then back at me, his jaw tightening. You don't understand what you're getting into, he said finally, his voice low, warning. You're right, I replied, my voice stronger than I expected. I don't understand how the man I married became a liar. I don't understand how I became nothing but a cover in your story. But what I do understand is this, you underestimated me. You thought I was blind. You thought I was weak. You thought I would stay silent forever. You were wrong. For the first time, it was his turn to be silent. His power over me was gone, and he knew it. The days that followed were a blur of choices, difficult, terrifying choices. I could have walked away quietly, filed for divorce, tried to rebuild my life in silence. But I couldn't ignore what I had uncovered. This wasn't just about betrayal between a husband and wife. This was about corruption, deception, and secrets that could harm countless others if left hidden. So I took my evidence where it needed to go. I exposed the affair, the manipulation, the political games behind closed doors. It wasn't easy. It wasn't without risk. But it was necessary. The fallout was explosive. His reputation crumbled, hers was shaken, and my life was thrown into chaos. There were threats, whispers, nights when I wondered if I had made a mistake. But through it all, I held my head high. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't living in someone else's shadow. I wasn't a cover. I was the truth. Months later, as I walked out of the courthouse with divorce papers in hand, the crisp air filled my lungs with a freedom I hadn't felt in years. The weight of betrayal was still heavy, the scars still raw, but beneath them was something stronger. Strength, resilience, a newfound identity. He had called her Madam President, a title wrapped in power and prestige. But in the end, I found my own title, one no one could strip away. Survivor, fighter, free. And as I stepped forward into the unknown future, I knew one thing for certain. Betrayal had broken me, but it had also rebuilt me into someone I never knew I could be. Someone stronger, someone braver, someone who would never again let herself be invisible. In life, betrayal can feel like the end. It can shatter the very foundation of who we are and leave us questioning our worth. But sometimes, betrayal is not the end, it is the beginning. A beginning that forces us to uncover our own strength, to rise above lies, and to reclaim our voice. Remember this, you are never just a cover, never just a shadow. You are the author of your own story. And sometimes, the greatest revenge is not anger or destruction, it is becoming so strong, so free, that those who tried to break you can no longer touch you.